While enjoying this presentation, please consider becoming a museum member, making a one-time donation, or a tribute gift in honor of someone important to you. Use the QR code here to do so. Your support allows us to continue our educational programming series. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. Hopefully we won't have sound issues tonight. I want to thank you all for coming. My name is Jennifer Mason, and I'm the Executive Director of the Colorado Snow Sports Museum. So pretty much lately, the most frequently asked question in the museum every day is, what's going to happen at Camp Hale? So we invited the U.S. Forest Service here today. So thank you for being here. We're very excited. Leanne Veldhuis, yes, is here from the U.S. Forest Service. She is our current ranger, correct, for the White River National Forest. But I have a few quick announcements. First of all, we have a lot of veterans in the house today. So I would like to thank you all very, very much for your service. And if you want to, you could stand up so we can all give you a big round of applause. And thank you for your service. We very, very, very much appreciate everything that you do. Jim Cluckner, Pete Thompson, same. Yes, he was. He was, we'll talk about Jim later. Yep, and then we couldn't do these without our sponsors. And our sponsors are Alpine Bank, the Town of Vale, and Westville Liquor Mart. So thank you to Westville Liquor Mart for the drinks. That's great. And our last Through the Lens was scheduled for Wednesday, March 22nd. And then one of our main speakers had a conflict, so we moved it. The last one is now Saturday, this Saturday in what is that, 4 days? 5 days. It's the Women of Vale, and it is Saturday, March 18th. Elaine Kelton and Carolyn Pope wrote a book called The Women of Vale, those who have walked this bridge before. It's pretty incredible. And we also have calls out to some other people, but Annetta Dixon is coming. But she's definitely in, and we've got some calls out to some other women that were here in the early 60s to talk about it. And the book that Elaine wrote was incredible. It's one of my favorite books. We refer to it all the time in the museum. It tells all the story about Widge and Bob Parker's wife. Just like she's like, we didn't have electricity. So I think people forget, in the early 1960s, there were dirt streets, there was no plumbing, there was, they literally she had no lights in her house. She carried around a construction cord with a light on the end. It now seems so glamorous, and they lived on Forest Road, but that's not how it was. And thank goodness for those women that stuck it out and raised their families here. So we're going to learn a bunch about those stories on this Saturday, March 18th. And before we get into today's talk, I also want to, I think you see these books all over. It's this really famous kind of, they do books on everything now, all over the country, not just here. But this is a brand new 10th Mountain book. So it's 10th Mountain Division at Camp Hale. If you're looking, it's just a really cool little book. We got it on Monday. It just came out. So we're really excited about this. It's Arcadia Press, and Flint Whitlock and Eric Miller wrote this. They're both kind of associated with the 10th Mountain. Flint Whitlock is a 10th Mountain descendant. So just a cool little book. It gives you lots and lots of facts and interesting tidbits. But we're going to get into, Leanne, we're so excited that you're here. And I forgot to give her the clicker earlier. So here she goes. And we're so excited to learn all about Camp Hale, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. All right. Let me get this. Okay, great. Well, good evening, everyone. As was mentioned earlier, my name is Leanne Veldhuis. I'm the district ranger for the Eagle Holy Cross Ranger District here on the White River National Forest. In case you're not familiar with how our national forests are structured, on the White River, it's a 2.3 million acre forest of public land. Is my microphone okay? And each forest is divided across the country, is divided into smaller sections called ranger districts. And so I'm in charge of the ranger district surrounding us here in Vail. It's 700,000 acres from Vail Pass up to Tennessee Pass, past Camp Hale, and then through to the far side of Glenwood Canyon. So Camp Hale is on my ranger district, where we're located here. Quick poll of the room. How many of you have been to Camp Hale before? Yeah, figured. Okay, good. Not everyone. Which is great. So, kind of in my talk today, I'm going to do a quick, maybe 5-minute history overview. A lot of veterans in the room. You can fact check me, I guess, on what I say, and then I'll sort of talk about present day and how we got to where we are with it now being a national monument and what that means moving forward into the future. So first off, also, I guess if you want to ask questions during, that's fine. Otherwise, at the end, I think we have a Q&A sort of set aside. So whatever works for you. So first off, for millennia, the Colorado Ute tribes traveled to what's called the Pando Valley. That's the valley that Camp Hale is in. And basically when the winter snow melted, it was part of their annual circuit to hunt, gather plants, medicinal plants, minerals. It's also part of how they would travel to the sacred hot springs in Glenwood Springs, which is now, you can go there. And the traditional Ute Trail lies under the road that runs along the Eagle River today in Camp Hale. So lots of history there, lots of evidence of tribal occupancy. There's hundreds of lithic scatter sites, a prehistoric camp, stone circles, that type of thing all throughout Camp Hale. And then, it remained a home to the Ute people until being forcibly removed by the Treaty of 1868, just as minerals and mining and that the pressure of that grew throughout Colorado and the West. The Ute tribes were pushed off their ancestral lands. And so that tribal consultation is a big part of the National Monument, which I'll cover a little more later. So then fast forward a little. Imagine it's 1942. The United States is in World War II. The U.S. Army needs a training ground for Alpine soldiers to fight in northern Italy in the Alps. And so the Army is looking for a space large enough to support 15,000 troops and all the support personnel. It needs to be at a high enough elevation to have access to alpine terrain. It needs to have a reliable water source. Is this microphone? It's okay? Okay, good. It sounds weird up here, sorry. It needs to have a reliable water source, easy transportation access, and essentially the spacious Pando Valley is over 1,400 acres at an elevation of 9,200 feet. It's surrounded by 12,000-foot mountains on up to 14,000 feet, a little further away. The Eagle River, which I'll talk about more, traverses the valley as a water source. Highway 24 runs right alongside it, and back then the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad is directly adjacent, so you could get there. And so the site was selected as Camp Hale. And at its height, yes. Yes, the question is this an original photograph? I see this picture used a lot. It's up there on the wall too. So yes, yeah, I'd say this is the most common, probably kind of historical, wartime, photo of that. Go ahead. In general, the U.S. Army. I don't know what kind of subdivision. No, I know that there was another site. I think it was in the vicinity of Yellowstone. Actually, they were looking all over the country. Yeah, wasn't just in Colorado. There were 3 other sites, and I can't remember the third one. Really? Oh, I didn't even know that. Marble? Oh, okay. There's a lot of ghost towns in the States. It could be any. Ashcroft. Oh, of course. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. That would have been nice. Yeah, I think wildlife stopped Yellowstone. So, at the height, the camp had about 1,000 buildings, 15,000 personnel, barracks, administration buildings, a gym, a hospital, stables, a rifle range, recreation, a gunnery, you name it. And so, in the surrounding forests and mountains, the troops learned to ski, snowshoe, climb, build a snow cave for survival, all of those skills, which enabled them to perform their combat missions in the Alps by 1945. And the kind of iconic battle of the 10th Mountain Division was Riva Ridge in Italy, which they won. And now the longest ski run in Vail is named after is named Riva after that battle. Yeah, exactly. Woo! So, I like to remember here, like, training here might sound glamorous, but actually it was really hard. Soldiers trained in packs with 90 pounds of gear at a high altitude in the cold, in blizzards. Little in the way of entertainment. I mean, you could get there with the road and railway, but no one else is really going there. So not the greatest social life. I mean, it's pretty remote, and soldiers actually nicknamed Camp Hale Camp Hell sometimes. So, but a silver lining from all this hard training, many of the 10th Mountain Division soldiers later then played a crucial role in developing the ski industry in America. And most Colorado ski areas, including Vail, Aspen, Loveland, can trace their origins to the 10th Mountain Division soldiers who came back and across the country. So then after the war, the only other military use at Camp Hale was from 1959 to 1964, when the CIA secretly trained about 170 Tibetan soldiers. But then Camp Hale was officially deactivated in 1964 and transferred to the White River National Forest, so to the U.S. Forest Service, for rehabilitation, kind of back into forest land, and recreational use. So that transfer began a long process of restoring the Pando Valley to its natural state. So the buildings were removed, foundations were buried, the surface was revegetated. You can still see some of it out there, but if most of you have been there, there aren't buildings on site anymore. And the Army never intended Camp Hale to be permanent, which is why it was a camp and not a fort. And so after the transfer to the White River, a multi-million-dollar effort ensued, carried out by the Army Corps of Engineers to try and clean up the site. The buildings had asbestos. There are unexploded ordnances and munitions all over the area. And there are still sites that are closed today to human entry in Camp Hale due to the presence of friable asbestos fibers on the ground. And that's the stuff that if you kick it up and breathe in, not good. And those areas aren't near, they're very well signed, and they're not near where you might recreate, but that stuff is still out there. And if you have been there, you've probably seen the big yellow, hazardous caution, unexploded ordinances, and that type of thing out there. And much of it has been cleaned up, but if you're off trail somewhere, traipsing about, you never know what you can find. And we still do find things today. So then, the Army Corps established their military munitions project, and we are still working with them today. It's not quite done. So then, kind of more just pictures of training there. A little blurry, sorry about that. But fast forward to today. What do we have going on at Camp Hale? It's a year-round recreation hotspot. Rock climbing, and so in the summer, year-round, like I said, so in the summer we've got hiking, mountain biking, the Colorado Trail, which traverses the whole state from north to south, winds through a corner of Camp Hale, overlaps with the Continental Divide National Scenic Trail. There are 45 miles of motorized routes. So, if you have your ATV, your Jeep or whatever, really popular area. There are 2 Forest Service campgrounds in Camp Hale. We permit, annual like half marathons, mountain bike races, like we have sort of those recreation events. And then in the winter, Camp Hale is one of the gateways to the broader Vail Pass winter recreation area. It's part of it. If any of you have gone there in the winter and paid your fee. So anyway, there are 2 10th Mountain Division backcountry huts that you could backcountry ski to or snowshoe to them if you're lucky enough to get a reservation. There are 13 outfitter and guides who You can go on a guided like ATV tour, the rock climbing, fishing, snowmobile tours, avalanche trainings. Everything's going on at Camp Hale today. But to pivot from the recreation use, we also have, there's a grazing allotment, so you might see sheep in Camp Hale. If you ever go in there, there's a permit for grazing. I mentioned we still have the Army Corps kind of partnership and the work to be done there, and along with the state, kind of the state Department of Physical Environment and Health and Safety. I mean, some estimates, there's still probably $250 million worth of cleanup that's needed at the site, on top of the tens of millions that have already happened. We still permit military training activities. Just over the holiday weekend in February, we had 300 troops. We opened up the campground and kind of the restroom and stuff for them, and they're still doing training there today because the military still has the use for that. Let's see. Lastly, and I was talking to someone about this before the talk, but I'll speak more to it later. But what's the plan for restoring possibly the Eagle River? I mean, that's kind of a conversation that's been ongoing for a few years, and we'll talk through, what that sort of looks like. And then there's also the 10th Mountain Division Foundation, which is sort of the, foundation charged with preserving kind of the history of Camp Hale there, and we're working closely with them. They've gotten a lot of grants and stuff to upgrade like the interpretive panels and some of the display, and what more can we do to communicate about the history of the site there. And so all this is going on, and meanwhile, social and political momentum is building for a national monument. And I'll speak a little bit to how kind of all that came about. So I think it was early 2018 or 19, a little bit of I left a few people out on this slide. This is not just Senator Bennett, but Senator Bennett, Senator Hickenlooper, and Congressman Neguse, I think it was February 2018 or 19, introduced in Congress the Colorado Outdoor Recreation and Economy Act. And it had a few things in it, kind of all around the state of Colorado, but for this, that legislation was going to propose that Camp Hale become the first national historic landscape, which would have been cool. But the CORE Act, as it's called, wasn't getting a whole lot of traction in Congress. Just for what a lot of legislation doesn't end up getting passed, that gets introduced in Congress. And so then starting in August 2022, maybe a few months before, whatever political powers that be started to think, okay, well, if the CORE Act isn't moving forward, what else, what's a different strategy or approach we could take? And so Senator Bennett invited the Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary Vilsack, he's there in the white shirt, and that's Senator Bennett in the blue jacket, Governor Polis, and that's Senator Hickenlooper. And invited Secretary Vilsack out in August of 22, so just a few months ago, to learn about Camp Hale and the history and everything I just talked about, as well as meet with key stakeholders. And so my staff, the forest, we helped plan that visit. It was pretty fun. We were there with walkie-talkies at the various entrances, like the governor just pulled in. Forest Service Vehicle A is parked here, lead the procession of the rifle range for the interpretive talk by the foundation. And we had parking attendants, to make sure people knew where to go. A Jeep tour showed up with 12 Jeeps, had to let them kind of go by, which I thought was a perfect example to the secretary of like kind of what happens here. Things like, at 12:35, be back at the tent for the remarks and the stakeholder meeting, and Secretary Vilsack has to be on the road by 2:15, press will stand over here. So he was essentially an advance scout, if you will, for the president, right? Like go to Colorado, meet with all the county commissioners, all the partners, everyone involved and who cares about Camp Hale, find out if there's anything secretly kind of controversial out there, do that sensing, and report back. And so certainly the speculation of Camp Hale becoming a national monument was greatly fueled by that visit, and it really brings everyone into its vortex. As soon as the Secretary of Agriculture is coming, the governor's coming, the senators are coming, like everyone's coming to this. And so then in October, we find out it's happening. President Biden is coming. And I'll say, you know, our local effort here, when the secretary came of Forest Service staff with our walkie-talkies, that is not how that goes when the president visits. And so I'll talk a little bit about the experience of having the president visit. Basically 1 week prior to October 12th, which is when President Biden came out here, my work phone rang, 202 number, you know, I took a call and it's Secret Service. I don't know how they got my number, and asking for the best point of contact, you know, for the security in briefing that was going to be held in Vail like that Friday. Bit of a misconception of what my role was versus that of my boss. I think Secret Service thought I was a law enforcement officer, you know, carrying a gun and all that. And you know, when I mentioned to him, like, well, definitely my boss, Scott, the forest supervisor, should be at the in briefing. The Secret Service is like, well, if you think it's best, but you know, we don't want staff there. Like, we want the decision makers. And so I had a great laugh with my boss, calling him staff. You know, sorry, you can't be involved, just staff. But then that was promptly cleared up, and he absolutely joined for the in briefing. And so, yeah, that Friday in Vail, probably had 50 law enforcement officers from city, county, state. I mean, everyone's coming together to get briefed by Secret Service, and they have their hazmat division, their snipers, their counter snipers, because you need someone. The snipers are protecting the president, but then who's protecting the snipers? So you've got your counter snipers, their transport division to figure out the motorcade, kind of their media, public affairs. Everyone, I mean, really impressed. Everyone was great to work with, very approachable. You know, I didn't know what to think about Secret Service, but yeah, easy to talk to and work with. And so then after that in briefing, that Friday afternoon, I went to Camp Hale with the Secret Service advance team for kind of an initial scouting of the area, all while we await the White House advance team to come in from DC, right? Because Secret Service isn't necessarily figuring out like where the stage is going to go and the flow of the event and all that type of thing. It's sort of their job to work within what the White House decides and then figure out how to protect the president. And so as the local Forest Service staff, I'll give kind of an example. The White River treated this event like a mini incident. So whenever we have a wildland fire, the Forest Service puts together a team. You know, we assemble a bunch of folks that can cover like logistics and finance and whatever you need to handle an incident. And so we pulled staff from all over the forest to help with road guards, because we were going to close off Camp Hale for the day that the president was here. No driving in if you're general public. One of my staff who's super familiar with the area got to spend the day with the lead counter sniper, just off in the woods somewhere, you know, figuring out where to go. We needed a crew to help build fences and put signs up. We assisted with the transportation for all the guests. So they were going to bus all visitors from the Beaver Creek ski area parking lot to Camp Hale. And so we set up like a little mini interpretation tent there, had I think coffee and donuts were there. Forest Service employees rode the buses and helped answer questions, and kind of a little bit of like a tour guide. Our logistics branch had to figure out, you know, how to order a bunch of porta potties at the last minute. It was, I mean, all hands on deck for days, like for a solid 4 days before this all happened. And then sometime late Saturday, just show a few more pictures there. Sometime late Saturday, the White House advance team shows up, and that's when you get the minute details of literally the one guy had like an app on his phone that'll tell you where the angle of the sun was going to be at the time of his remarks, so you can get the lighting just right with the stage and like where to orient the stage. Like they are, you know, they're thinking of all of that. And the serious side of it too, like they you know, they wanted a covered kind of area in case of an emergency, if you needed to like drive a vehicle into it and take, you know, if something were to happen. You know, at the time it was fingers crossed that the fall colors, which were peaking that Saturday, would last like 4 more days, you know. They kind of did. That Saturday would have been better. But, and so then, meanwhile, we're getting spot forecasts every day from the National Weather Service to try and predict as closely as possible what the weather was going to be. I think there was a rain backup plan, but, you know, it wouldn't have been the same. and it worked out. Had great weather. Um, us local Forest Service staff were like, "Hey, our White River National Forest sign looks really good. Can we put that behind the stage? And we have an extra over at the Dillon Ranger District." And they're, "Yeah, sure." The White House staff was good with it. So that worked out. That was cool. Brought that in on like a Sunday. It's not normally there. Um, and then yeah, I mean, most of you have been to Camp Hale, so picture Camp Hale, right? It's a wide open valley surrounded by hills, cliffs, mountains that the president is going to be standing in the middle of in line of sight, sitting outdoors. It's a long motorcade from the Eagle Airport. So they shut down I-70 and just Highway 24. It's really windy, to get up there. So that the security aspect of this location, I think, was actually pretty challenging. And I had some funny quotes that I dug up. One of the counter snipers, because the White House people were saying, "Oh, the fall colors," and the counter sniper guy was like, "Where you see colors, I see danger," um, and then just joking, because I mentioned the asbestos and the bombs and all that, and so the White House guy was like, "Okay, so we've got snipers, bombs, asbestos, maybe some snow, because we weren't sure about the weather. We're good. This'll be fine." And then let's see if one more of these is funny. Oh, there was just a little bit of like man, it wasn't like this when we took him to Afghanistan. This is trickier in a lot of ways. So anyway, that was interesting to work with. And our fire crew showed up one day, kind of with their Pulaskis, which are like an axe. And one of my coworkers was like, "I wonder if they know how many snipers are focused on them right now, like just in case." So anyway, let's see what other pictures I kind of have here. Yeah, just the stage being set up, all the sound equipment. I mean, this is all kind of White House folks. But yeah, figured out a good area, and then boom, President Biden. After a lot of remarks, so here we got President Biden. This is my boss, Scott, the forest supervisor of the White River. This is Governor Polis, Secretary Vilsack, Congressman DeGoose, Senator Bennett, and then it looks like I cropped out, not on purpose, Senator Hickenlooper. But they all attended, and I think there were maybe 200 or 300 people in the audience, and you can tell the weather worked out great. A little bit of fall colors, but thank you, and yes, and our sign, exactly. Yes, I can go back. Yeah. Yes, thank you. I wasn't sure how. Okay, yes, where people disembarked from the buses. Because there was the one at where the buses picked everyone up, and then as you disembarked at Camp Hale, yeah, we had a whole. You can talk to it. Really? Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, they probably took the bomb sniffing dogs there. Yeah. Mm-hmm. They had the dogs. I mean, they checked us out, but no, it's true. I was expecting like metal detector type stuff, and that wasn't quite how they operated. So, yeah. But yes, thank you for inserting that as well. We had a lot of really awesome interpretive and kind of artifacts of history there that day. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Totally. Yeah, yeah, the president's there. And even the 4 days leading up to it, you'll chat with the Secret Service folks, like whatever. But then the day of, like it was like, who are you? Are you on this list? I don't care if I've been talking to you for 5 days. Like you're not getting in this. If yeah, no, all business. Yeah. And as soon as Biden left, it was like, yeah, walk wherever you want. Like it's cool. So, so great. Anyway, and I'll forward there? No, that's perfect. No, thank you. I realized I forgot the 2-minute link to my YouTube video, but that's okay. I just had a short clip of Biden actually signing it, but you can picture it. So yeah, after many remarks, he signed the first national monument of his presidency. And so I'll speak to that next. So here's a map, and I know I haven't spoken too much about the 10-mile area, but the entire monument, it's the Camp Hale area and this sea of the 10-mile mountain range. And so and because that's historic also with tribal history, the 10th Mountain Division would go to some of these even higher elevation peaks. I mean, these are all the 13ers here, right? So here's Breckenridge, ski area, Copper, and then the Climax Mine. Ski areas, private land, that's not part of the monument boundary, but yeah, so the soldiers go over there as well and train, and also just as an area of historical significance to Colorado, all of this is included in the monument. And so the 10-mile area is actually on the neighboring ranger district, our Dillon district. So I don't care about, no, I'm just kidding. So anyway, if I refer, it's technically, the Camp Hale Continental Divide National Monument. So I'll be co-managing it with my ranger district neighbor over there. But if you hear me say Camp Hale National Monument, it's just because it's easier to say. I don't mean to leave out the 10-mile part. So in total, it's 53,804 acres. And so I'll talk a little bit now of, okay, what does this mean? What happens next? First off, the monument, it doesn't really restrict anything. All the recreation, as you were, there's no limits on anything. It doesn't restrict any valid and existing water rights. It did a good job of making sure, no private property rights will be restricted. If you have a grazing permit, that's allowed. In no way did they want this to hinder any wildland fire response efforts. And I could talk about that a little bit. I mean, the asbestos and the unexploded ordinances and everything. If we were to have a wildland fire in this area, typically we would send firefighters in with their Pulaskis or shovels. You start digging line, maybe bulldozers, that kind of thing. In Camp Hale, we wouldn't, out of safety for firefighters, we wouldn't put boots on the ground, as we say. So it'd probably be primarily like an aerial, helicopter type of response. It'd be tricky. I mean, I haven't experienced, that hasn't happened. But yeah, we have kind of a pretty specific fire response for the area, just because of all the hazards still. So anyway, I'll speak to sort of some key focus areas of the proclamation of making this a national monument. You don't have to read all this. This is like the actual language from the proclamation. And so I just wanted to point out, first off, the Forest Service, well, the Secretary of Agriculture, but we're part of agriculture, so the Forest Service, is in charge of developing a management plan for the monument. And so we are still, and this all just happened, 4 months ago, so we're still in the process of figuring out what that'll look like. I'll get to it on the next slide, but we're going to begin our tribal consultation, which will go into the monument planning. This fall, the entire White River National Forest is going to kick off our forest plan revision process. So that's sort of a concurrent management plan process. And so I imagine for the monument, it'll get a little bit sucked into that bigger process for the forest. But yeah, we still need to figure out, are we going to create a new position? Are we going to have a monument manager on the federal Forest Service employee? Or will me and the Dillon Ranger District figure out who can take this on? So we're figuring all of that internal planning. And all this to say, this will be a very public process. Once the Forest Service begins developing a management plan for the monument, we're going to want all of the input from everyone, whether you're a resident living in Missouri, just taking an interest, wherever you are, if you want to participate, you'll be able to. And then certainly kind of any key interest groups like the Watershed Council, National Forest Foundation, county commissioners. I mean, there's so many. The Jeep clubs, like all of the Backcountry Hut Association. I mean, all of these entities will have a say in what they want to see in this area. And like I said, we're not anticipating a change in the recreation use that's currently out there. You know, question? Go for it. Yeah. Is this for minerals? Is this for minerals restrictions, like mining? That I think what you're referring to is the Thompson Divide, and that, and I do feel like the newspapers got this slightly wrong, but yes, so that is a whole separate area closer to Aspen. It's kind of in the Roaring Fork Valley, and the Thompson Divide area was part of that original Core Act, the Colorado one. And so, separate from the monument designation, President Biden also proposed a mineral withdrawal for that area. No, not set in stone yet. That'll have to go through a public process as well. Yeah, yeah, for sure. And that'll be that'll be controversial. Yeah, I mean, anytime you're preventing, anyone from doing something on public land, like mining or whatever it is, yeah, there'll be a lot of people that comment on that. But yeah, that's kind of more towards Aspen. No, no. Unless there's another secret 400 acres I don't know about in this, but I'm guessing it's that one. Any other questions? I haven't really stopped for that. Okay. Yes.
So who's in charge for this whole project, for guidance, for determining what is going to be changed or what's going to be preserved? Is there such a program?
It'll fall into the local Forest Service here. Yeah, it'll be me, my boss, the district ranger over on the Dillon Ranger District. It'll be Forest Service staff managing that public process, much as we would any other public process we do. Yeah.
Is there a plan now? Do you have any idea of what you want to preserve or develop?
I think, I mean, and I'll share some more language too. You know, the proclamation of making this a national monument speaks really definitively about preserving that history of the site. And so we'll get into that when I speak to river restoration. But yeah, what is the right balance there of, do you change anything? I mean, maybe we go through this process and everyone's like, we need better like interpretation. Maybe we want a visitor center. Maybe we want, what do we want more of? But yeah, maybe nothing is restricted. And so far, that's not our intent right now either. Of that type of use needs to go away. There haven't been any of those kind of conversations. Did that answer your question? Okay. So the next up, I'll keep going through some of these. I spoke to the tribal piece. The monument proclamation really deliberately says, Department of Agriculture, so the Forest Service, shall pursue those opportunities for co-stewardship. Like there's definitely a mandate there to work hand in hand with the tribe of what's their vision for the monument. And so we've started those initial conversations with the Ute tribes. There are 3 Ute tribes in Colorado. And the Ute peoples, I mean, they covered a huge area, pretty much the whole state. Right now, they're based out of Utah, like an 8-hour drive away. So this isn't an easy like, hey, let's meet for lunch and talk about the monument. I mean, this is going to be a very formal, deliberate process of setting up meetings with the tribes to learn from them about their hopes for the monument. And then I spoke about all the remediation that's still needed at the site. That's also in the monument proclamation. There's direction there that the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Agriculture will work together and let's figure this out. This doesn't say anything in here about funding for that or right. I mean, language like this is vague to some degree, and in a large part we have been doing a lot of this, but there's definitely like explicit direction. keep doing that, keep cooperating, and figuring this out. Because like I said earlier, there's tens of millions of dollars of work still needed to clean up the site. And I thought I'd give you kind of an idea. So here, this is Camp Hale, and these are the areas. So let's see. I mean, this is just like the main road through. You can drive on all of these roads, but camping and going off-road or off-trail in like the valley bottom is prohibited. The asbestos and kind of that cleanup and such has been mainly capped for kind of like 18 inches, maybe up to 18 to 2 feet into the ground. And so if you were to dig any deeper, you could start to hit that asbestos and the contaminated materials again. Going in, I mean, it's a huge area. Going any deeper than that, that's where you're getting your huge cost for an area like this of roughly 1,400 acres. We've had those talks too as a staff. Like, what if a recreation shop wanted to put in a new toilet or something, and you have to dig down like 12 feet? We either couldn't do it, or we need to consult with the Army Corps, and they could do a check, so to speak, of the area and confirm for us if it was cleared or not. But that takes time and resources and all of that, and the Forest Service does not have that expertise. So those are ongoing conversations. Here's kind of a current aerial view of Camp Hale. So this is the whole valley floor bottom that we're looking at. And you drive in, there's a few entrances off of Highway 24 here. And then lastly, I scoured the proclamation language. I have one printout copy here if anyone wants to flip through it for talk of, okay, what's the plan for the Eagle River? And a little background on this, it was a bit before I was here, before I started my position here, but kind of through 2015 through 2018, there were some stakeholder groups started. The Forest Service tried to start a project for what does restoring the Eagle River look like, because it is the headwaters of the Eagle River, which is a big deal. And I'll go back to, we'll start here. So this is a 1939 aerial shot of the Eagle River, and you can see it's doing its river thing, right? It's sinusoidal all over the place. It's got its floodplain. There you go. And then when the Army Corps showed up to make Camp Hale the military site, they brought in, that kind of got a little blurry, sorry, but they brought in millions of pounds of dirt and fill, and they channelized the entire river. And so now, I'll go back a couple slides, and so now the Eagle River is a straight line through the valley bottom, which is not what rivers like to do. And they also don't like millions of pounds of dirt, I mean, it basically kind of destroyed the headwaters, right, of the Eagle River. But in terms of...
But it kind of makes sense, because the way the river was, you couldn't have built in that original photo.
Exactly. And
like,
so when
where would you have built the buildings? Like, the river was,
Yeah.
You see, and they're the Army. They want it straight.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There you go. And so when you think about how do you balance what we want in the monument moving forward, preserving that history piece, in our conversations with kind of the state historic preservation office and just others, the fact that the river is channelized is one of the core historical pieces of the entire site, because everything orients itself from that. And so, not to say one is more important than the other, it's not necessarily a choice of history versus river restoration, but I think that, to me, moving forward, will be a really interesting conversation. We in consulting with the tribes, not sure they're going to be focusing on necessarily the World War II U.S. history piece of Camp Hale. They're probably going to be thinking back to the thousands of years before, when this river was the healthy headwaters of an important river. And so, so all that to say, those conversations haven't started yet. I think they'll be really interesting ones. And, it's the kind of thing that the Forest Service and any federal agency, you can do a project that impacts the history of a site, whether it's a historical building or whatever, and you may have to mitigate for that. And sometimes you mitigate with like really good documentation to preserve that history, or you can put in more interpretation or something like that. But I don't know. I mean, this would be at a scale that would really fundamentally change the remaining footprint that's there. So that will be part, and as I go through the proclamation language, there's nothing explicit in there of restore the Eagle River. I mean, it talks about, I had some of the language. It talks about restoration of natural resources. I think I had one more slide with some language. This is showing that trade-off and maybe a little bit of conflicting language in the proclamation. Preserve its historic and prehistoric legacy. I mean, is a normal kind of river part of that prehistoric legacy? The Ute Trail lies under where the Eagle River is today. So what's the right balance to strike of restoration versus preservation, I guess? And yeah, welcome all of you to participate in that conversation when we go to public comment for the monument. But I think I anticipate, creating a management plan for the monument is one thing, and possibly pursuing a project of some form of a river restoration project. That's going to be a separate, that's a whole other environmental analysis and input that's needed. So I'm not sure that those would happen at the same time. Kind of anticipate, we'd figure out our plan for the monument, and then that'll help us dictate what we do moving forward. So with that, just if you want to find the proclamation language, it's online. It's kind of a long link, but let me just make sure I didn't forget anything kind of critical. But I guess with that, happy to take questions, and I'll end just by saying we're at that pivotal time of this is still brand new, and we're all still figuring it out. I don't want to say nothing has changed. It's a monument now, but on the ground, like it's still what it was, for the last however many, since World War II, or since it became Camp Hale with the Forest Service, maybe a little more cleanup and everything, and all that has happened since the 60s. But yeah, the recreation, all of that is still the same as it was 5 months ago before it was a national monument. And I'll end on a photo because that's better. I keep using this picture. Anyway.
If we have a microphone
Great.
for questions.
Earlier you mentioned back in August that it was under consideration for a different designation before it became a national monument. What's the significance of that, and what would it have been like if it had been, what did you call that, a historic?
Yeah, it was going to be a national historic landscape.
Landscape.
Yeah. Okay. And so like Hanging Lake, if you're familiar with that, it's technically a national natural landmark. There are kind of these fancy sounding designations, that we give certain areas, right? And so I think with making it a historic landscape, I do know that a lot of the language that ended up in the monument proclamation was almost like a copy paste of the Core Act language. Like it was very similar language. And so I think it would have accomplished a similar, preserve the history of the site. It would have directed us to create a plan for a national historic landscape instead of a national monument. I think the main difference is that would have been a legislative kind of change versus with President Biden making it a national monument. That's an executive branch type of decision. Yes.
You may have mentioned this earlier, however, what does this mean by making it a monument status? What does that mean in terms of funding for the area? Do you get more funding because you're a monument designation? If you've already addressed that, I missed that. But is there any thought on that versus any other designation you could have gotten? Certainly a national park would have been a huge difference. But
right.
Any thought on that?
It seems like this or any kind of designation, I guess if it's a park it's different, but no, this doesn't necessarily come with, an extra influx of funding from Congress or the executive branch or whomever. I think like internally in the Forest Service, as we start the plan for the management plan and such, if we need some additional like staff capacity or whatever to get through that process, Maybe some additional funding would come from like our regional office, or it might make it easier or more appealing, I guess, for partners and such to apply for grants or whatever to help with certain aspects of it. But it doesn't necessarily come with an automatic, you get $1 million for the first 10 years or something like that. That didn't happen with Camp Hale. And I'm not sure if that's happened with other designations, if this isn't the first national monument, so it's possible it might have, but it doesn't always. I would say probably most often probably does not. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I thought in your presentation, because River Ridge
Yeah.
means a lot to a lot of people, but the concept of River Ridge is really in the climbing walls that
Yeah.
those people practice on there. I suggest you put a little emphasis on those climbing walls.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll do. I'll go back to the picture of the climbing wall. There, maybe I could point it out in like my aerial map here. Let's see, the climbing wall. Sorry, it's a little blurry. I think it's kind of right over here, right? Yeah. Still used today. I mean, you go out there on a weekend, and there's people there. Whether it's a guided, like a kind of a permitted outfitter taking folks climbing, or just going out with friends.
And one other comment, they have a book in here called Climb to Conquer. I recommend it to all of you because in that gives a good description of what Riva Ridge and Mount Belvedere really means.
And someone either read it or someone was telling me, I mean, the 10th Mountain Division soldiers were so respected and viewed as just like badasses in World War II that when they came upon the Nazis on Riva Ridge, and kind of during the surrender and such, I'm probably misquoting this, but I mean, I got the sense that the Nazis would just fight to the death and whatever the battle was. But when they saw it was 10th Mountain Division soldiers, they were like, oh, we respect, like, good on you, like you got us, and so there's just that little bit of kind of that respect there for how amazing they were. So thanks for bringing it up. Any other
questions? Yeah.
Having visited Camp Hale, I will say those signs about the unexploded ordnances do catch your attention.
Yeah.
Is there any, from government records or anything, how many are out there? What are we talking about?
No, I think there's a lot of places in the country with this issue, and no, there's no way of knowing. But I think just a couple years ago, someone kind of came in, not to our office, but I mean, people report findings all the time. Kind of behind the rifle range and the hill slope there, you could find a lot of just bullet casings and just a lot of lead. There's just stuff out there, and I think it's probably impossible to know. There's an area the Forest Service manages in West Virginia that has the same big yellow signs, and but people backpack there and do their thing there all the time. So, yeah.
If you talk to Lee Reimel,
Yeah, I know, Lee.
who owns those cabins up on top,
Yeah.
he can take you out and show you some real dangerous things.
Okay, cool. Good to know.
The old toilets. The old toilets where they used to have
The most dangerous of all
they
the
used
things
to
you
have
can find in the forest.
six seats all right next to each other, and those boards are still there. And I don't know if they're biohazard or
Yeah.
not.
Closed to human entry. Thanks.
Yeah, just as an Alaskan visiting Colorado, I don't know if people know how unique this designation is. The USDA doesn't manage too many national monuments. We have 2 in Alaska. We have the Misty Fjord National Monument, and we have the Admiralty Island National Monument, which are amazing places if you ever get to visit there. Yeah. And so this is pretty exciting in the great American story.
And are those managed by
USDA Forest Service.
Those
in
are
the,
Forest Service
in the
too. Okay.
Tongass.
Cool,
in the
cool.
Tongass. Yeah, we have 2 forests, the
Yep.
Chugach and the Tongass. And anyway, it's pretty exciting. This is a very unusual designation and something to be very proud of. But
Thanks. question in the back.
Any other questions? Oh, good.
One thing I would hope that would kind of be at the beginning of this whole process is to get more visibility in that area. I mean, we've got those signs up there that have some of these photographs in them and so on, but you talked about a visitor center,
Yeah.
and I realized money was brought up, and those things cost money.
Right.
But a lot of people drive by there and never even realize what's there,
Yeah.
unless they take the little road off and get into the little parking areas where those are. And I would hope with, now that you've got it designated as a national monument, that something gets done sooner rather than later to kind of bring more
Yeah.
publicity to the area.
We did get a grant to update. There's that turnout off of Highway 24, and those signs are pretty hard to read. We do have a grant to replace those. We're kind of waiting for the snow to melt a little more, but absolutely. And how do you make it more of that entrance? Like in the winter, for example, I think a lot of people are accessing from like the Vail Pass sort of area. I mean, it's closer to Denver and just wherever people are coming from. But yeah, what's a fancier entrance into Camp Hale?
At least a sign.
Yeah,
You know, a
we
sign.
we do have a sign. We have our kind of Forest Service standards for signs. So yes, we have some signs that we're working on and trying to get all of this out there before summer. Basically, when we get out there with like equipment and stuff and put all that there. But you know, in terms of a plan for like visitor center, sort of that type of thing. I mean, I think we'd want to hear that a lot of that would have to go through a public process still. I mean, any sort of ground disturbance or kind of anything significant as a federal action, like we're required to seek public input.
So we're a few years away.
Yeah. Yeah. Not from better signs though. That'll come sooner.
Any other questions? I just wanted to say too, at the ceremony, Representative Neguse and Governor Polis both brought up Sandy Treat. Yeah, because
Yeah.
Sandy Treat. So Sandy Treat came to the museum every Friday
Oh,
and
cool.
did a talk, Tales of the 10th, for 10 years, and he did it. He came. He died on September 1. He was here like on August 22nd.
Yeah.
Like, so he was here till the very end.
Yeah.
And he would always bring it up at the end of his talk.
Yeah.
And
he would have been there for sure.
Yeah, and his coin phrase was, he just doesn't want a hot dog stand there. So just don't put a
Yeah.
hot dog stand on it. And
We're
Sandy.
not allowed to have hot dogs.
Yeah, oh, good. But I thought that was pretty incredible. And he did, like, I had only worked here, I don't know, 2 months. And all of a sudden,
Cool.
Representative Neguse
Yeah.
met with Sandy Treat in the museum they did like a quick briefing. I was like, what is going on? But it was pretty incredible. So Sandy was a big part. I'm so happy that
Yeah, I think
this
the
happened.
I mean, I know like the veterans' voices in this played a huge role, and the two veterans at the Francis and oh my gosh,
Francis Lovett.
yeah,
I can't remember the other one's name, the other gentleman's
100
name.
years old, and we're there. And Francis is blind now, and one funny quote is, you know, some of our staff were passing out these brochures just to people sitting in the chairs, and she handed him one, and he was like, "You think I need a brochure?" You know, of like, he's like, "I know everything about this place, and I can't read this anyway." So great sense of humor too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was pretty. It's just so it's a wonderful thing, and I'm so honored and happy that the veterans that are alive had gotten to see
Yeah.
that it became a national monument, because it really, camp meant everything
Mhm.
to them. So yeah. No other questions?
Sure.
No. Yep.
Yeah. The area is still winter range for elk habitat. You know, you get that kind of lower elevation. I mean, a lot of snowmobiling and just people kind of there a lot. It's lynx habitat to some extent. I mean, it's definitely wildlife habitat, you know, in general. But the river is definitely like digging deeper. You know, once you have a channel like that, it's just going to keep scouring deeper and deeper. It's pretty steep bank in a lot of places to get to the river. So, I mean, I haven't seen an elk using it, but I'm sure they probably do. But for sure, an impact. Yeah. Great. Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Leanne. Yeah. I want to thank Leanne again for donating her time to the museum. And I want to thank everyone who's a museum member. We can't do this without the support of you, so thank you very much. And yeah, and if you want to know about the links on Vail Pass, we had a talk last year that was fascinating. It's on our YouTube channel. Yes, one of the craziest things, like they put a link, they moved him like 10 miles, and 2 days later he went right back to where he was. Like, it's amazing how far they can travel. And of course the photos of them are the cutest things you've ever seen with their giant paws. I mean, their paws are, anyway, but there are there's a lot of links that live up in the Vail Pass, Camp Hale area. So that was kind of the whole Category 3 thing with Blue Sky Basin. So that was also talked about in that talk. So thank you very much to the U.S. Forest Service and Leanne. We really, really appreciate her time. And thank you again, everyone, for coming. So, yep. And we'll see you next Saturday, or this Saturday.